For a session presented by Visa, please welcome Senior Vice President and General Manager for Cybersource, a Visa solution, Carleigh Jaques, in discussion with Skift Senior Research Analyst, Walter Gertz.
Thanks for joining us today, Carleigh. As a way of introduction, most people obviously know Visa as a payments network, and you've been working with Visa for a long time. But you now lead Cybersource, which is a merchant acquirer. So you're working with all types of merchants to offer them sort of the payment infrastructure and the technology they need to do business. Now, I don't think it's untrue to say that for many travel merchants, payment processing was simply an enabler of their business. It probably wasn't something that they spend a huge amount of time thinking of. But I think with all the changes that we've seen due to COVID, payments has really been pushed to the fore and really has become a key part of business strategy, I feel. So tell us a little bit more about sort of the payment space and how it has evolved and what you're seeing in terms of the unique set of challenges that the travel industry is facing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Walter. So yeah, in terms of the role that Cybersource plays, we really act as a payment management platform in support of merchants and acquirers across the globe. And through the course of that work, we have a heavy footprint in the hospitality industry. So what I would say first and foremost, and we kind of take it all for granted as a baseline, is that travel is incredibly complex just in terms of core expectations. So we assume resilience, right? We can't have a consumer show up at a counter or trying to transact online and not able to purchase a ticket to go home. That would be a problem. We also have an expectation that it's global. I mean, travel is a global industry. But when we think about what happened in the pandemic, that focus on the customer experience and providers' ability to react really, really quickly and dynamically to the changes moved to the forefront. And it really did become central to people's business models. So what I mean by that is that in particular, a lot of things that historically would have been anomalous behavior became normal. And the successful providers were able to identify that really quickly. So if I think about airline again, historically, if we saw a lot of global one-way tickets, that would be a problem. That has a profile of looking like a fraudulent transaction. In the course of the pandemic, that was actually a legitimate transaction, and you needed to have a lot of technology and AI/ML, but also a lot of business rules and context to identify that was just people needing to get home. If we think about what then happened as we've had some windows here of rebound in hotel bookings, it's actually been kind of a similar phenomenon where typically people planned vacations, 28 days out, and there was a lot of anticipation of travel, and that was a part of the pleasure of the experience. What we're seeing now is that actually that people have that desire to get out, to be spontaneous. That's the experience that they're looking for. And that a provider's systems need to be able to accept that kind of transaction and recognize it as a good transaction, again, even though it's anomalous. Or then if I think about things like food delivery, most of us wouldn't have done a lot of food delivery in the course of our travels historically. But now with things like limited room service, many of us, when we are venturing out, are ordering our food through a delivery service. We happen to support many delivery services across the globe, but you have to adjust, again, your parameters around that, because delivery to a place that isn't your principal domicile is a good transaction. You also then still have to be vigilant against things like friendly fraud and what have you. So what we've seen is that we have to be dynamic, and then we also really need to know who our customers are and protect them and think about a transaction that sees them holistically. So one of the other big things we've observed is that card on file transactions have become really important to delivering that great customer experience.
Really interesting. I want to talk about the customer in a little bit. I want to touch on something else that you mentioned. You talked about the rebound, and you mentioned a lot of different changes there. Obviously, one of the changes is as well that a lot of business just dissipated, right? I mean, it was just gone. If we now talk about rebound or recovery, can you just explain sort of where and how travel companies find growth now, and how do they satisfy their customers?
Well, we do see this opportunity to lean into the growth and the rebound that is happening. I think the companies that are being successful in addressing that are really thinking about four things. So I would say it's about physical safety, digital safety, innovation, and then rewarding the loyal customers who are coming back. So what do I mean by that? From a physical safety standpoint, I think both your employee base as well as your customers really want as much of a touchless interaction as possible. So when we think about things like, again, I mentioned the card on file experience, in the airline industry, I was just on a flight in the last couple of weeks, and before we took off, the airline announced that the passengers should load their credentials into the mobile app. Like, that just didn't happen before the pandemic. If we think about contactless transactions, again, that's a newer transaction type, particularly in North America, really well accepted in Europe and many parts of the world. That has been an important capability for our hospitality clients to offer. Pay by link, again, sending someone an SMS so that they can pay for a spa service in advance. That's what I mean by physical safety. Then when we think about digital safety, again, the way to deliver these really rich experiences is through a digital credential moving through the cloud. Travel happens to be, and hospitality happen to be, those experiences that move a lot between different partners in an ecosystem. And it's important for your customers from a trust standpoint to feel like those credentials are safe and secure. None of us want to be that weakest link in that customer experience, because that will break the relationship. Then when we talk about innovation, I really do think that with all the challenges, there have been some silver linings. And one of those silver linings is really building a digital relationship, knowing more about your customer, because it's a digital first relationship, and thinking about the experiences as we go forward that you can wrap around that new sense of identity. So I think that's going to be a foundation for the future. And then the last thing is around loyalty. And again, that digital credential really does open up the opportunity to build loyalty experiences in the future. And we know that that has been a really successful formula for hospitality in the past. If we think about things like co-brand, Visa has a big footprint in the hospitality co-brand business. And that's a way for your brand to stay at the forefront in your relationship with customers, even when they are not, in fact, traveling. We see that high spenders in whether it's hospitality, airline, hotel, they spend 1.5 to 2 times more than non-co-brand customers. So that's clearly a valuable lever for our clients.
Yeah. Okay. And so when you talk about sort of this digitized experience or relationship to have with the customers, I'm sure a lot of hoteliers will recognize that it is the hotel industry, especially, is obviously seen as a very high touch rather than a low touch industry. So how do you sort of marry those two things together, and what sort of customer demands or habits have you seen change? Have you done any research into sort of how consumer changes will impact travel players moving forward?
One of the things that we're really seeing is that consumers, again, they want flexibility, they want information, they want communication during the course of their travels. That's particularly important now, just when the world is so dynamic. So again, that might mean better price discovery, that might mean more flexibility in terms of cancellations. I think the other thing that we're seeing is this desire for the digital experience to stay digital throughout the customer journey. And one of the things I think about, and I think Europe honestly is a little bit more advanced in this than perhaps the US is just at this point in time. But my family was in Portugal over the summer, and European travelers have gotten really accustomed to the expectation that you will load your vaccination credential, that you will have a QR indicating your status. In many instances, you might need that credential to get into a restaurant, as they're asking for example, in Italy. So if you have that much of the experience, the surround of the experience that's digital, I think the consumer expectation that payment stays digital is going to move to the forefront. I think it's very similar to what happened in the US when we started to experience things like digital boarding passes, right? A lot of us have loaded that digital boarding pass into our e-wallet. So I think that we'll see that more holistic, more seamless experience continue into the future. And then I think, the last thing is that customers are just going to expect us to be flexible and, again, meet them in the environments that they are. So one of the examples would be that we've worked with an airline where WhatsApp is an important channel for them. And in the course of a customer journey, after they have a confirmed booking, they can load for ancillary services and purchase those ancillary services in WhatsApp, and then share that itinerary, share that journey with their friends. So that's a great, rich, dynamic experience that we think is actually going to become more of the norm.
It's very, very recognizable. I'm joining you from the Netherlands. I've got my QR code for my vaccination ready. Sadly, it couldn't get me into the US to be here today. But we're talking about digitized experiences. I think you recently launched a report on or a global fraud survey. So I want to talk a little bit about fraud, because obviously digitized experiences offer opportunities, but probably also can lead to some more fraud. So I know from the hotel industry, card not present is one of the most persisting types of credit card fraud, or friendly fraud in many cases, that's happening. So how do you sort of marry the better customer experience with an enhanced fraud management?
Well, so you've touched on a really important balance, Wouter, like this desire to deliver this seamless, immersive experience and drive growth, but then also balancing that with fraud. And unfortunately, fraudsters are inherently opportunistic. Cybersource performs an annual survey with the Merchant Risk Council. One of the things that we saw in 2021 was that 75% of merchants experienced an increase of fraud, and that's in terms of number of attempts, as well as the dollar value of the fraud in 2021 over pre-pandemic levels. The other thing that we saw was a really interesting shift in the type of fraud that was perpetrated. So it really has moved to friendly fraud, card testing, where a fraudster will either steal a credential and test to see if it is good, or in fact, sometimes create a credential. Now, if you think about all of that AI, ML, and almost Bitcoin mining type technology, it's available to try and construct a credential and test it. So those types of fraud have moved to the fore. It really does mean that folks need to be vigilant in protecting themselves. And I think about tokenization and that EMV secure transaction type as being essential to helping merchants and the acquirers that support them protect themselves. So, you want to preserve that customer relationship. A tokenized credential lets you do that. And then EMV Secure provides incremental information to enrich your knowledge of the transaction. So what we think about in terms of partnering with our clients is deep knowledge of the industry, understanding changing dynamics, and anticipating that you will need to be flexible in terms of your fraud protections going forward, not just your business model.
Interesting. The nerd in me wants to know more. We only have 1 minute left, but we've put the link to that survey that you mentioned, that report, in the app and in the chat. So people should go and read that. So finally, like I said, 1 minute left, very quick answer maybe, and it's going to be a tough question, so hopefully you can be succinct. It'll be hard to talk about sort of future opportunities. Obviously, we're still very much in the middle of COVID, but I'd love to pick your brain on sort of what are you seeing as the next big opportunity, or if there's one main takeaway that you'd like to give the audience, sort of what would that be?
I think my takeaway would be not to waste a crisis. And this huge leap forward that we've taken in digital, this opportunity to build a digital relationship where you know more about your customer, really is a great foundation going forward. It unlocks new experiences, it unlocks cross-merchant experiences, it unlocks loyalty. So while it's been demanding and unfortunate, I really do think it provides a once-in-a-lifetime foundation to build a great relationship with your clients.
Great. I mean, that's some very good advice. Thanks very much, Carleigh. Really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Wouter.